Everyone, is Terry Miller with Terry's Tidbits and the Des Moines, Iowa user group. We had Eric Smith come and present to us in our March session. And if you don't know who Eric Smith is, just jump out to unofficial unofficial SF, and you'll see him everywhere there. He is a key player in that whole website and has contributed incredible amounts of content and value to all of us who like to build flows and found some limitations where and frankly, he's built some of these ideas that Salesforce now has adopted. You're going to see him talk through a variety of things, of some of his favorite components that he has built for the Salesforce platform. It's a fantastic session. You're absolutely going to learn a lot from him. So watch this particular video. I think you'll be glad you did. Hey everyone, it's Terry with Terry's Tidbits. I am so glad you're here. All right, so welcome everyone to our Lunch and Learn Des Moines User Group meeting. Thanks for coming. We have a very special guest with us today, and I'm super excited to introduce you to Eric Smith. If you're not familiar with who Eric is, you will be glad to have met him today. So he's one that I've wanted to have for quite a long time, and I'm super excited that he's able to do this for us today. So you're going to learn some, and I have zero idea what he's going to do for us today, other than it's probably related to flows and some really cool stuff that we can do as it with some of the things that he's done in the past. So we're going to explore this one together and just kind of have some fun, I think, today. So Eric will be speaking in just a few moments. Clarissa and I are your user group leaders here in Des Moines. And you can actually, that slide is outdated for Clarissa. That is not where she works. But local events that we've got today, obviously we have our Lunch and Learn with Eric. April 18th will be our next meeting. That one will be a hybrid meeting. So I believe we are scheduled to be on site at Holmes Murphy, and then we'll also be broadcasting that one for those that need to join remotely. Coming on site does give you the benefit of food, though. So keep that in mind. It's kind of a nice benefit of coming on site. We will do some Einstein Analytics Lunch and Learns on the 16th, Flow Orchestrator on the 20th of June. July, we'll be back in person, where I'll be speaking on architecting flows, making sure that we're helping us understand how to create flows in an efficient way. Marketing automation, data cloud, and artificial intelligence. And then we'll do another planning session toward the end of the year, and then our normal annual mingle and jingle. So add those dates to your calendars, keep those dates open, and that would be our primary events here for this year. If you're interested in the community events outside of the Des Moines area, those are listed here. Texas Dreamin' is coming up later this month, actually just next week, and upcoming Salesforce events as well. Always like to promote the MVP office hours. That is a fantastic place to get help if you've not used it before. If you ever get stuck and you just want somebody to toss an idea out or throw a challenge out to, it's a great place to get help. These guys are fantastic who support that particular event. It's free support, and you can't beat that. And just some super, super smart people that will join that call to try to help you resolve any issues that you might have. Our Slack channel, if you are not a member of that, please scan that QR code, join. And then just real quick, any open job opportunities, anybody looking for work, new certifications, attempts, other announcements. So I'll just kind of open the floor real quick for you to share a little bit there. Looks like in the chat, Tracy's checking to see if anybody else is going to witness success. So maybe reach out to Tracy if you're planning to attend that one. I did get an email from a member of our community who has one of the black Trailblazer hoodies. I think he said it was a size medium. If you have been wanting to have a Trailblazer hoodie, don't have one, he is open to finding a place to give it a new home. So if you wear a medium size and you want a Trailblazer hoodie, reach out to me. Okay, Dylan, I see your message. Send me your contact information in a private deal, and I'll let the two of you get connected and see if you can give that hoodie a new home. So awesome. Thank you so much for that.
Yep. And then on the announcements, I got the AI associate and business analyst certifications recently. This is within the last month. So
nice.
Pretty excited on that.
Yeah, very nice. Excellent. Deborah, I see marketing associate. That's awesome. Congratulations. Capato fundamentals from Shane. That's neat. That's a good one. I didn't even know they did certification, so that's pretty cool. Awesome, everybody. That's fantastic. Midwest Dreamin' again. Alyssa, I will be there as well. I would be. Eric, do you come up to Midwest Dreamin'?
I am not going to be able to make that.
Not this year?
I'm around sometime.
All right.
I used to travel to Iowa in the past and out that area, but currently I'm hanging out in the beautiful state of Maine.
Yeah, very good. Lisa, Omni Studio consultant and developer. That's pretty impressive. Excellent job with those certs. Super. All right, everyone. You just heard a little bit from Eric there. I'm going to spotlight his video for us and turn this over to him. But if you're not familiar with who Eric is, again, I'm really excited that he's agreed to speak with us today. And you've probably, if you've used Unofficial SF, you may have used something that he has created. And I'm actually anxious, Eric, to kind of understand your role and what you've done out there. If you're a contributor, if you've helped, whatever you've done there, I know you've been heavily involved over there. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about that too, as you introduce yourself. But sure. I'm going to be quiet and just let you take it and go wherever it is you wish to go today. So thank you again for taking the time to speak with us here in Des Moines.
Right. Well, we'll go on a little bit of a journey. So, yes, I've been very active on Unofficial SF. This was started by a vice president of product management at Salesforce, Alex Edelstein, as a way of trying to get ahead of the curve, put some things out there, do some things with Salesforce, do some things, especially with automation, with flow, really to kind of try out some new technologies and try and, as I mentioned, get some things ahead of the curve. I got involved with it fairly early, took on an admin role in the site. I've taken a number of components that he may have initially put out there, enhanced them, cleaned them up a little bit, and put a lot of my own components on there as well. And the reason for that is I'm kind of a stubborn person sometimes. If Salesforce doesn't do something that I want to do, that I want to put in the system, put in front of my customers or my users, sometimes I'll find a way to make that happen. But in finding a way to do that and make that happen, I can tend to be a little bit lazy in that I don't ever want to have to do it again. So when I create something, I tend to probably spend a little more time on it, but I try and create something in such a way that it's not just going to fit my particular use case, but I'll try and make things configurable with attributes and other things that it could be reused again by myself in the future, maybe a slightly different use case, but by sharing it and putting it out there, it just opens these things up to a wide variety of users and a wide variety of use cases. And so when I do something like this, I do like to share that and put them out there so other people can take advantage of some of these components as well. Been fortunate that some of the things that I put out there have now become part of the standard part of Salesforce, especially in terms of flow and screen flow, some of the components there. And a lot of it is a lot of the reasons why these things became parts of the standard Salesforce offering is they do monitor and see the demand and the usage of sites like Unofficial SF and things that really interest people and really are important to them. Gets their attention and say, gee, this is something that we ought to try and move forward as well. One example, and I'll show this today, is a data table component I created that is now there's a limited version of it, or an entry-level version of it, available standard on Flow, but the component I've created is now installed in over 80,000 different Salesforce orgs. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea that, well, here was something that I needed and I wanted, but wow, I guess a lot of other people did too. And they've been able to take advantage of that. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do, and don't be afraid to try some of these components out and see what they are. The nice thing about them is they are open source, which means they're available for anybody to use, but the source code is also available too, not just to have, but to learn from, to study or understand what some of these components are doing, or to take and modify to better fit some of your own needs. So it's not like you're blindly installing a package into an org, but you actually have the code, you see what it does, and it's almost like you're there creating it yourself, but you're just taking advantage of something that's already been keyed in there for you. And what I want to do today is show you some of these components, and in doing so, hopefully just kind of spark some creativity in you, or have folks think about things they may not have done before. Maybe there's a different way of doing something, a different way of presenting information to my users in Salesforce. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go through some of these components and see how they may work for you. So let me slide this off to the side and share a screen. So what I want to show is 10 different ways that you can...
Eric, we've got your notes side of the presentation screen.
You got my notes. So let me switch to a different one then. So let me stop sharing. I've got a lot of monitors here. So let's see. Let's try again. Share the screen. How's that?
Perfect.
Great. So we're going to touch on 10 different ways you can get creative with Lightning components. Now, many of these can be used in Flow or on Flow screens. Some of them can be used on Lightning record pages, and many of them can be used in both places. So let's just go through a few examples. A little bit about myself. I'm a technical architect at Rafter One. We're a Salesforce consulting partner. Been there almost 3 years. Fantastic company to work for. I get to deal with a lot of different clients with a lot of different use cases. So that is nice. I've been involved in technology for over 45 years. I had my own personal computer company for over 20 years. I've worked in sales. I've worked in project management and a number of different areas. I've just been named a Salesforce MVP for the 5th year in a row. I hold 6 Salesforce certifications. And as we talked about, I'm an active contributor and admin on the unofficialsf.com website. And the components that I'm going to show you today, they're all available on this site. They're available for free. There's no charges. There's no coding required. They're all designed to be configured by you, an admin, whether you're putting them on a page or on a flow, and they can be customized with these attributes. And I will have a QR code for each of these, which will actually take you straight to the link for that particular component. And then after the presentation today, I'll share with Terry a PDF of the whole presentation. So if you don't want to grab all the links now, he'll have it available and you can get those at a later time. But I'm going to start with a very simple component. And this component can be used on a Lightning page. It can be used on a flow screen, and it does something really impressive. It draws a line. Why would you want a component that could draw a line? Well, one of the reasons is, I've got a fairly busy screen here. It's got some text, it's got some buttons, and has some other things. But sometimes you just want to separate things on the page, but put a little distinction or a border or anything between one part of a page and another part of a page. So we see here, just by putting a simple line between these three buttons at the bottom of the screen, we can kind of separate those. We have an update button that actually applies to the component immediately above it. And then we have two other buttons which apply to the whole screen itself. So this is just a simple example of where a line can make a difference in how somebody is looking at a page or looking at a flow, and how it may just help them better see it or better understand it. Another example, here's a screen that has multiple data tables on it. It's kind of all jumbled together, but if we did that same screen and we put some lines in between them, it then becomes much more readable, easier for somebody to look at and pick out the information that they need. Now, this particular component, horizontal rule, I've created a new version of it, and it's part of a base pack of screen components. And the new version is called Draw a Line. It does the same thing as the horizontal rule component, but it also has something we call a custom property editor. And a custom property editor gives you an easier way to interact with the component and set your attributes. So rather than having to type in the line width, the margins, the color, the other things, we actually have an interface that you interact with. So select your attributes as to what you want the line to look like. And as you're doing that with this component, we actually see that line on the screen with the margins, with the color, with the thickness. So you know ahead of time exactly what it's going to look like before you put it, say, on your flow screen. Let's take a look at another component. This one is primarily designed for Lightning record pages, but you can use it in Flow as well. And it's a component designed to display a large text area. Screen real estate is important. And there are times where you want to be able to allow the user to avoid having to do a lot of scrolling up and down to see information. So this large text area component, which we see at the top part of the screen, is a component that has a toggle button with it. And you can toggle this large text area on and off. You can also allow the user to make it larger or smaller on their own just by dragging the corner of that. So by putting this in there, it gives the user the ability to see that large text area, but also gives them the ability to interact with the page, look at it when they need to, turn it off when they don't need to see it. And one of the attributes that I put in this component to make it a little more widely used is that it can be a view-only component, or you can set it up to say, hey, I want the user to be able to edit this large text area as well. And if you're looking at this in the edit mode, you have an update button. So if they make a change, they can click on the update button and it will update that text and update that field on the record. So view only or edit mode, your choice. You can configure it either way. And then when the user is interacting with it, they can turn it on or off and actually change the size on the page. One of the things we saw on that particular component was a toggle. There's some interesting things you can do with the toggle component. And this is one I came up with. A toggle field button to actually change the value of a field directly on a Lightning record page. And this toggle button, I have a toggle here to escalate a case. If they select that toggle, it will actually go and immediately update a checkbox field on the record. And the interesting thing about that is when you do something like update a field, you can trigger other automations. So for example, here we have a record-triggered flow running behind the scenes that said, hey, if this is escalated field gets set, I'm going to send a notification and pop up a notification on the screen. So that's where we see when we set this, the notification icon lights up because we had a a triggered flow running in the background that says, hey, the field changed, I'm going to go and do something. And by changing that field, we're not going into edit mode on the detail. We're actually just clicking a toggle button, and it's making the change for us. Another interesting thing a toggle button can do for you is one of the things you can do in a flow and on a Lightning record page is have conditional visibility. And conditional visibility can be driven by the value of a field. So here I have a couple just sample components. I call it the red component and the blue component that will only show if a particular field value is set as true. But I'm setting that field value or clearing that field value with my toggle. And as I change the value of that field with my toggle component, the conditional visibility kicks in and either shows it or hides it. Again, this is another way of giving your users a little more control over what they see on the screen and how they're interacting with that screen. And this is just an example in the app builder. When you're editing the page, you can set your conditional visibility based on the value that you see in a field. So we're setting the conditional visibility when we design the page, saying, look at this field value. If it's true, display it. If it's false, we don't display it. And then the toggle button's making that change for us. Here's another interesting component I created is sometimes you have users that use more than just Salesforce. They have multiple systems they're interacting with, and sometimes they have to take information out of Salesforce and put it into another application. And sometimes people will do that by copying and pasting information from one app or one screen to another one. This particular component I created allows you to just put a button on the page to say, take this information and put it in the clipboard. So just by clicking a button, the user copies that information in a clipboard, then they can go somewhere else and paste that information that they just copied. So that's a handy button to use in various places where you want to have information available that the user is going to take and use somewhere else. Another way you can configure this component is you can even have it once they click the copy button, it'll actually hide the information that they've copied. So there are just a few different ways you can make it look on the screen, but you can control that when you set your attributes for this component when you go to use it on your pages or in your flow screens. Just a simple idea just to copy something into a clipboard. This one it's a fairly common need. It's not standard in Flow, although a lot of people would like to have this be standard in Flow, and that is the ability to redirect that flow to another page or another record. And one very common use case for this is, say you have a flow where somebody's creating a record, and then you want to redirect them to that new record they just created. So there's a component out there you can put in your flows to say, here's the ID of the record. Go take the user to that record. And this can be configured to do it either in edit mode, like we see here, pops up an edit screen for that record, or just in view mode, where they go to the record and they can just see the information there. They don't necessarily have to go and make any edits. So this redirect capability can be very handy anytime you are using a flow to get information from the user, create a record, but then you want them to be able to see that record or interact with that record. So using this redirect to a new record component allows you to take full control of that in your flow. Quick choice pick lists for flow screens. There were a lot of limitations. The limitations are becoming fewer every release of Salesforce, but this component it's basically a pick list component, but it's a pick list on steroids. It allows you to do pick lists, radio buttons, visual cards, I call them. But in addition to being able to present your choices or your options in a number of different ways, this component also recognizes record types So you can pass in a record type ID, and it will only show you those pick list options that are available for a particular record type. Here, I'm looking at the same field, opportunity stage. But in this particular example, I can tell the component to say, hey, here's one record type, show me only those options in this pick list that are available for this record type. For a different record type, it's going to show me different options depending upon how you have this field configured in the Salesforce setup. This component can also be reactive to values of another component and determine what values go into your pick list. There's a lot of different things that you can do with this for dependent pick lists, for record type pick lists. And as I mentioned, you can do it in different formats, pick list formats, radio button format. This visual card here is a real interesting way, a nice way of presenting selections to a user. When you have just a few options, you can put a little more information in there. You can even include an icon with this to make it look a little better on the screen. You can do it in one column, you can do it in two columns. These are all attributes that you as the admin putting this component on your flow, you have the ability to set all those settings the way you want the component to work for you.
Hey, Eric, we've got a question from Brandon in the community. Could the redirect flow to new record be used in Experience Cloud?
If the user has if the user has access to the record, yes, they'll be able to go to that record and see that record. I think this one is set up, and there's some other navigation and redirection components available. That one of the things in Experience Cloud, it tends to have a slightly different URL format than if you're running in production or if you're running in a sandbox. So that's one of the things that has to be taken into account. And some of these components do directly support that, or there's some, if you look at the documentation for some of these, I've got some information on how can you find out what the base URL looks like in whatever system you're running in. Are you running in a sandbox or you're running in Experience Cloud? There are ways to tell you how you need to structure that URL. So yes, it can be used in an Experience Cloud.
And Matt has a question there as well. What type of flows can it be used in? Also back on the redirect flow.
Oh, if you're redirecting, you're redirecting somebody because they are interacting with the flow, which means it's a screen flow. So you wouldn't necessarily take somebody to another record unless you're interacting with that user. So that's a triggered flow or an auto launch flow wouldn't necessarily be able to take advantage of that type of component because they're not interacting directly with the user. So it is primarily designed for a screen flow. So anytime you have questions, feel free, Terry, go ahead, stop me, and I'll try and answer questions as we go. So we'll keep it fairly informal. The data table component, this is the one I mentioned, has a wide variety of uses. And I'll just go into a little bit of the history as to why I created the component to begin with. It was probably about 6 years ago when all Flow had available was something called a dynamic record choice. If you wanted a user to be able to pick from multiple records, you use the dynamic record choice built-in option. And the dynamic record choice, we see an example here, allows you to show a list of records, but you only can show one field from that record. And you can do a single selection, or with checkboxes here, you can select multiple records, but you can only show one field. So what we see here, we're seeing a lot of information on this screen because what I did is, like what many people did with dynamic record choice, is they created a formula field saying, well, I want to show more than just the name. In this case, I wanted the name, the quantity, a service address, an ID. So I created a formula field that kind of jumbled them all together into a single field and used that on my display. Well, the problem with that is it doesn't look very good. Nothing lines up. To really allow somebody to select records, it's much easier to do it in a tabular format where everything lines up. So that's where the data table component came in. I wanted a way to take records in fields and show them in a tabular format that made it much easier for the user to look at that information and interact with those records and select those records. Now, since this time, this has gone far beyond that. We can now do things like sort, filter, select, search. The user can interact with the table. They can change the column widths. They can change the sorting. They can change text wrapping, turn that on or off. You, as the admin building these data tables, you have the ability to set the column widths. They can either be a fixed width, or you can say, flex this column to fill the remaining space, or divide up the remaining space between these three columns, but make this fourth column real narrow or real wide. You have full control over what you want that table to look like. You can change the headers. You don't have to use the field name. You can put your own name in there. You can put icons in there. You can even display graphics, rich text. You can change the formatting of rows and fields using some special attributes when you set up your data table. And when you configure this, you also, the way I set the property editor up for this is you are interacting with the data table while you are configuring the data table. So you're actually playing with it to make it look like what you want it to look like when it finally ends up on the screen. You're not having to remember how to define a bunch of attributes, key them all in, and then hope for the best when you see what it looks like. You see what it looks like as you are configuring the table. I've created a lot of documentation for this. There's a lot of resources, a lot of blog posts that give you information on how to use it, a lot of different use cases and examples of where a data table can really bring some power to your flows.
Yeah, this is probably one of the ones that I use the most frequent. And Matt, I see you've got your hand up, so I'm going to let you jump in with the question.
Sure.
Eric, is there any plan for the standard Salesforce data table to get any more of the features in the unofficial SF version?
Eventually, yes. Probably some of the biggest ones that are in my data table currently that they have yet to implement. And the standard one is your ability to set the column widths. Inline editing is a huge one. I think a lot of people are looking forward. When are they going to put that in the standard data table? I've talked with the product manager for screen flows and for data table. I've talked to the developer that has created the code for them for the standard version. And there's a lot of challenges they have, and they have a lot of things that they have to hoops that they have to jump through before they can release something officially to the whole Salesforce ecosystem. So it's going to take a while. But yes, they do plan slow but steady improvements over time with this.
So is it a compliment to you when they actually take an idea that you created and implement it in the tool, or is it like, dang it, they stole my idea?
No, it's not dang it, they stole my idea. It's more of an affirmation that, I had a need that I felt that other people would have as well. And it's kind of an affirmation that, a lot of people want to do this, not just me. So it's the type of thing that, lookup. There was never a lookup before. That was only an unofficial SF for a while. There wasn't a data table. There wasn't the ability to sort or filter. Get records in is a component I created that before it became a standard part of the get records, where even the one that I have now is more configurable than the one that Salesforce has, where you can actually show a record collection and pick and choose the field that you want out of a collection of records to compare against the values when you do a get records. So, as they see these type of components get traction, that people like them, that people use them, it just helps them set their roadmap a little better for where they want to go. So, if I had $1 for every time one of these things got used or installed, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be probably on a Caribbean island somewhere with my toes in the sand. But no, it's a good feeling to see other people be able to take advantage of these components and use them themselves. So,
Brandon has asked, what's the name of the get record compared that you just mentioned?
Get records in. It's an extension of the get records component, but I created that before Salesforce added the in operator. And so it allows you to say, get me all of the records where a certain field value is in this collection of values. And an example of that would be if you, say you were looking at an account and you selected some of their contacts. And then you said, okay, now that I have these lists of these 4 contacts, go and find all of the opportunities where this contact is has a particular opportunity role on those contacts. So you're not getting them one contact at a time. You're saying, here's a group of contacts. Now go find all the opportunities where any one of these contacts has a particular opportunity role on that opportunity. It's just a way of combining multiple things together in a single get records. So another component is a navigation button. We had the action earlier to say just navigate to a record ID, but we can also do that type of navigation in a button, where you're not just telling the flow to do it, you're waiting for somebody to click on a button before it goes and does something. And this navigation button was some of the original way you could put custom buttons in a flow to take the place really of the next or the previous or the cancel or the back buttons that you would see on the bottom of the flow screen. It allow you to create your own buttons with your own labels, with your own colors to do what you wanted them to do. So these navigation buttons, they can go to a URL or they can just take the place of the next button, but it allows you to create the buttons that you want on the flow screen. And the way this works is that on the flow screen is you could have 3 or 4 or 5 buttons that all do the same thing. They just go next. But what you do is after that screen, you have a decision that says, which button did they click to get to this point in the flow? And based on what button they clicked, you go and do something different in the flow. So you can have somebody exit from a screen with any number of buttons, but then you have the ability in your flow after that screen to say, what button was clicked? I'm going to go and do what I need to do based on that decision that the user just made on that prior screen. And this navigation button component also has the ability to make a button inactive. It can make a button not even visible. And that can all be controlled by values from the flow. So this is just a little component that's running here that if the user clicks on different buttons, that does different things. So the flow will do something different. And here, I have an example here that if the user or the contact is inactive, I see one set of buttons. If they're active, I see a different set of buttons. But that's all within a single component being controlled by attributes whose values are being set inside of the flow. So you can build some logic into these buttons as to what ones display when and what they do for you. Quick lookup. I mentioned that lookup was a component that wasn't really initially available in flow. What this component was originally designed to do this was pre-reactivity in screen flows, but allowed multiple instances of this component to be able to talk to each other and react to each other. This was kind of the original flow reactivity where the value selected in one of the lookups determines the filtering on another lookup. And this can be parent-child, grandchild. You can go a number of different levels here with these types of lookups. So this example here is based on what I select for an account, I'm only going to see contacts that are related to that account that you just selected in the prior lookup. Before this component and before reactivity, the only way you could do this was to have one screen where somebody selected an account, they click next, then you do some processing in your flow, you do a get record, say, this was the account, I'm going to get all the contacts for this account, then I'm going to go to a new screen and show them a list of contacts. Now you can select from the contact based on the account you picked in the prior screen. Well, that's not a real good user experience. They keep having to click next to go from screen to screen to screen. What a component like this does, it allows them to stay on that same screen and see the selections they need to see based on another selection they're making on that same screen. So this is kind of a dependent lookup component, dependent lookup function. So we started with a fairly simple component, which drew a line. We got into some more complex components like a clipboard component, a data table, a lookup, and redirection. But I'm going to finish with a component, another simple one, and this one just shows a picture. So what if you want a button that's not going to look like a button? But what if you wanted an image that behaved like a button? So this image button does that by allowing you to select an image to take the place of a button. Here's an example flow screen with somebody setting some attributes, some parameters, and then they're based on what they select, they're going to go call Conga to produce and send a document to a user. But rather than just have a button that says, send document or Conga, I actually have an image. But not only can you have an image, this component allows the image to be different depending upon where the mouse is on the screen. So if you hover the mouse over the image, it'll change the image. If you click on the image, you can show another image. So this basically gives you a little more, almost like a 3D type button if you want to. By moving the mouse, the button changes. So this just adds a little flair to your screen, just by having different images depending upon where the mouse is. And when you click on that image, you can either go next in your flow or go to a record or do whatever you want. It's just a way of replacing the button with something a little fancier on your flow screen. In fact, you don't even have to have a button. This is an example. This is quite a while back, but I'll be honest with you, this had to do with switching somebody from Classic to Lightning. And I wanted to show an image that if they were trying to switch from Lightning back to Classic, they couldn't do it. And I still work with clients that are running the Classic, believe it or not. So this isn't that old of a process. But here's an example where if somebody switched to Classic and tried to run something, I set the flow up to display an image. In this case, it wasn't just a static image, but it was a GIF file, an animated image. So if somebody tried to do something in Classic that I wanted them to do in Lightning, I put this image up there and said, nope, not going to happen. You need to go back to Lightning and do this, please. please go back and do it the new way that we set up for you. So, if you have people that have a hard time making that transition, sometimes you can just do something like that. Just put an image up there, put a little humor in there, and just have something slightly different in your flow by being able to show a picture. So one of the things that was, we covered these various components, but one of the things that really is key to, I think, improving the user experience is, whether it's in a flow or on a record page, is show them the information that they need to see only when they need to see it. So take advantage of conditional visibility. But keep in mind that conditional visibility can even be interactive with some of these components. So the user can, or the logic in your process can control that visibility for you. So don't put too much information on the screen, just put what they need to see when they need to see it. So that's my presentation. There's a lot of other things out there, a lot of other components. I just wanted to go over a few different components here just to spark some creativity and maybe give you some ideas of what you may want to do in some of your own Salesforce orgs. So thanks.
Awesome. Eric, that was fantastic. I love what you're doing out there for sure. I've used so many of those different components myself, and some of the earlier ones were, let's just say I'm grateful for what you've done to enhance some of the earlier ones, because you've lowered the entry level, the bar, to where really any admin can do these things. So if you're on the call and you're thinking, well, man, this is too complicated, it probably isn't.
You don't need a developer to do the things, anything that you saw today. You don't need a developer. You can do it yourself. And you do it with clicks.
Yeah. And if you go out to unofficialsf.com, I put a link in the chat earlier. but there's some base components that you can install that it's like installing something off of App Exchange. So if you've installed something from there, it's really no different. So install it in a sandbox and just start to kind of toy around with some of these things. They are a lot of fun, and it gives you so much capability that you would not have out of the standard flow screens. There's also a ton of other things out on Unofficial SF that go way beyond flows. So if you've not been out there for a while, it's worth your time to go explore that website for sure. Any specific questions for Eric that you have? Any components you've used that you'd like to ask a question about, or?
Be glad to answer.
And feel free to unmute. You don't have to be shy. If you don't want to unmute, you can ask in the chat, and I'll convey that.
The quick choice on reactivity.
Yes.
So I have a screen flow where I have them select a radio button. How does that work then? Like from that radio button, like normally without the reactivity, I have them like depending on the radio button I select, it goes down a different branch. After that gets the record type that went to that radio button. But the choice, the pick list option on that main screen has everything. And so I didn't know the way to kind of make that only show the options for that record type. How do you?
Yeah, with quick choice, there's a few different ways that you can specify what the values are going to be to select from. One is a pick list field. And when you select a pick list field, you're also able to specify the record type ID. And when there's a record type ID passed in as an attribute to quick choice, it'll only show the options that are available for that particular record type. So if you're selecting a record type, when you select that record type, the ID for that record type can be passed into the quick choice component. The quick choice component can react to that. So if you are identifying that record type ID, say in a formula, is probably the best way to do it. Anytime that formula value changes, the quick choice component will change and show a different set of options.
If you're doing it with a formula, are you kind of hard coding?
Not necessarily. So you're using some radio buttons to select a record type?
Yeah.
So when you do that, one of the things there's two ways you can do it with reactivity. One is when you put the choice values in for the radio buttons, you can put the label in, which is the name of the record type, but the value can be the hard-coded record type ID, the record ID for that record type. And that value that's coming out of that can be referenced in a formula the formula that just says whatever the result of this radio button component is, that's the value. And that formula would be your input attribute for the record type on the quick choice. So that one way of doing it is to hard code those record type IDs in there. Another way of doing it is it's a little more involved, is you can do like a data table that shows a list of all of the record type values for a particular object. The user selects the one they want, and then the output from that data table could include the ID or the record type ID for what they selected, which then gets passed into the quick choice. They would react to each other. And you could even do it with another component that's available on App Exchange called Data Fetcher. And what Data Fetcher does is, based on a value coming in, it goes out and does a query. So, based on a selection that a user made, go and query all of the record type records that match this particular label they just selected in the radio button. And once it selects those, you then have the record available to you, which has the ID value.
Very cool. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question. Other Other questions or thoughts that you have? How many of you have used an unofficial SF component? If you raise your hand or toss something in the chat. There's a lot of you who haven't used them yet, evidently. So we're evidently not the group of the 80,000 that have used the data table. So this hopefully is helpful for you then, that you're seeing you're the right audience for this presentation if you have not used these components. And if you're nervous about using them again, it's super simple. And you go out and just play around, explore it. It's not one that you need to kind of put your "I'm scared of" hat on. You'll be amazed at some of what you're able to create, I think, if you leverage them. I know the very first one, Eric, you showed was the horizontal rule. That was probably one of the very first ones that I ever used.
Right.
Super simple. You set a couple settings in the parameters of the component, and man, it makes your screens look so much nicer.
Yeah.
So, there's the website right there.
So just a couple things to look at if you go to this particular website. There's a lot of information there, a lot of documentation, but if you click on, I'll just show you a few of them here. If you click on Flow, it'll take you to a general page, but there's a couple links here. The screen components and actions are two different types of components available for Flow. And I try and maintain a table of contents for each of these. For example, for the screen components, it'll list all the various screen components here. For example, here's data table. And I try and show the date that this was last updated, what the current version of the component is. And then from these table of contents, you can click and go right to the documentation page for the component. And then once you're on the documentation page, you can do things like look at, here are the install links that you want to put it in a developer org, or you want to install it in a sandbox. You have the links right there that'll do that for you. There's also on just about all of these, there's a link directly to the source code as well. So you can see that. The base packs was mentioned earlier. The base packs, there's a couple reasons for having them here. One is the screen components base pack. There's a few things like drawer line and some other ones that are in there that'll always get installed when you install the base pack. But the primary reason for the base pack is that a lot of the components I showed you have what's called a custom property editor. And that's the thing that makes it easier for you to configure it. It's not just a list of attributes, but it's that screen you're interacting with to say, here's how I want this particular component to work. And these custom property editors all use a common set of components to give you that interface, to put that on the screen for you. And that's why we have this base pack. This is keeping the developers for each of these components from having to reproduce some of these simple screen elements that you might see in that property editor. They can take advantage of what's in the base pack without having to reinvent the wheel for a lot of these things. So that's why we see that base pack. It's the components that make it easier for you to configure the other components. The Flow Actions base pack was put in there for a couple reasons. One is there is some Apex that's required in some of these actions and components. And the reason for putting these in the base pack is twofold. One is that if it wasn't in what's called a managed base pack, of managed code, all of that Apex would count against your limits in your org. You're only allowed so much Apex in an org. By putting it in a managed package or putting these in a base pack, it doesn't hit any of the limits in your org. The second thing it does for you is that some of the test classes for these base pack classes, it's not going to be driven by anything special that you might have in your org, any special or custom validation rules or other things that might trip up what's meant to be a generic test class for a generic component. So by pulling these into a one package you install, you don't hit your limits, and you're not messing with validation rules or other custom things that you may have in your org.
Hey, Eric, I want to address one question that came up. It's not really a question, but a statement on the chat from Matt. A lot of corporations have concerns with security for things that are being installed. I know we're at the end of our time here. We've got 1 minute, but briefly touch on some of that if you can.
That's where being able to go and look at the source code is key. So if I went back to the data table component, for example, if you want your IT people or other people to look at that, I do list all of the components of the base packs that are used. I say what the Apex controllers are that help support that. And also there is a link to the source code that your IT people can go in and they can go directly to I've got to find where I have it here. They're usually right at the bottom. They can go directly to the source code. And they can look at all of the code that is in there and do a security audit on the code. And based on that code, they have the ability to see what you're putting in the org. And if they say, well, we don't want to install something that's out of a package, well, don't install something that's out of a package. Copy and paste the source code into your org and deploy it that way. So it's just like you wrote it yourself. I mean, there it is. So
awesome. Well, Eric, this has been fantastic. I hope it stirred a lot of ideas and potential solutions for people here today. So thank you for taking your time to do this. Very, very much appreciate the effort that you put in the community and then specifically taking time for us today.
Well, glad to share. I'll send you a link to the slide deck and you can share it with your users group.
Sounds good. Have a great rest of your day, guys.
Thank you, everybody.